Hello everyone. I believe I am streaming right now. Give me one sec to set everything up here. Yeah. Pretty sure that is everything. Yeah. Okay, let me turn this off. Let me take these cans off. And let me take a little sip of water before we get started here. People, I hope you are doing well. I hope this Monday finds you oh so well. I, as usual, when I do these things, am on my break from work, which I feel like maybe part of the reason that I've been hesitating on doing these more has been the fact that it's just kind of hard to set up, and it's hard to set up in an amount of time that is feasible for me during work hours. But that's just kind of the reality of doing content creation when you're still working a full-time job. I mean, that's the reality. So if you've never watched one of my streams before, let me do a little introduction. This is a show called What You Readin' For, and it's basically a show where I talk about books that I've read, usually recently. Although in this case, for this episode, A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah Maas, I read this back in February, so it's been a couple months. As per usual with this show, we're a little behind because I can read books apparently faster than I can make shows about them. And that's just kind of the reality of what's going on here. So I forgot. Let me pull up my notes here on A Court of Thorns and Roses because, again, it's been a while since I read it. I feel like I remember a good sort of amount of it. And so but I did want to kind of have some notes up here just in case I need to reflect on anything. So let me talk a little bit about the book itself. Number one, I first became familiar with this book when I kind of had just started getting back into reading. For those who are unfamiliar with the lore of this show, I basically, I went for a long time without reading a single book. I don't even know, probably 5 or 6 years without even picking up a single book or reading anything. Even though I was a pretty big reader during, school. And so I kind of got back into reading and started reading, a couple books, nowhere near at the pace that I do now. I feel like once I got back into it, it took me a while to be able to read at the pace of a normal reader, which is, I guess, what I would consider myself now. So when a friend of mine brought up something, I guess we were maybe talking about just reading and getting back into reading and stuff. And he had mentioned, oh, did you know they're making a TV show based on that book, A Court of Thorns and Roses? And I was like, I don't know what that is. Because, again, I've been out of the sort of book loop, I guess, for a couple of years. Come to think of it, actually, when was this book published? Court of Thorns and Roses was published in 2015. So that would have been the year that I graduated from high school. So definitely during my time period of just straight up not reading anything. So I kind of became aware of this book, and then once I kind of started going to bookstores more regularly, you cannot walk into a bookstore without seeing this book, without at least seeing the cover. It's a pretty one thing I will say about this book is that the design of the cover, the actual just it's very eye catching. It has a very distinct look about it. Now I think a lot of books now are kind of copying this look, and so maybe it's if you're just watching this and don't aren't already aware of it, you might kind of be like, well, that's every fantasy book. It's like, in my opinion, this is kind of what I've noticed, at least. This is kind of like the blueprint I think a lot of publishers are following now in terms of their cover design. I could be totally wrong about that. I should stop speculating about it. So I kind of saw this book around, and I just the title, I kind of was like, I kind of like that title, and I'm interested. And also I was kind of like, well, if they're making a TV show about it, I want to read the book first so that I kind of have context going in. Now I have since learned that I am pretty sure they are not going forward with that TV show, which, now that I have read the book, I think is probably for the best. I don't think this is a book that would translate particularly well to the silver screen. So a friend of mine was very into this book. She was very, very into this book. And this came up actually in my book club that I'm a part of. This is another book club book. And I was like, oh, I've been meaning to read that anyway. And when I mentioned that I was going to be reading this book, my friend was like, you're going to hate it. Like, I think maybe she kind of assumed, because romance is typically... it's a genre that is largely read by women. I hate to kind of like make it about that, especially because, like, in my opinion, it's like, well, men can enjoy romance too. And also, like, it doesn't like, what's the point I'm trying to get at here? The point I'm trying to get at largely is that, like, I think that essentializing a genre into like, oh, that's a genre for girls, or that's a book for girls, I think is like really, I mean, sexist obviously, but also just kind of reductive and not really willing to kind of look at the underlying maybe reasons why a large majority of romance readers are women. But these are bigger topics than I'm able to tackle with my puny brain. The thing I will say is that my friend basically was like, you're just not going to like it. Like, number one, it's romance. And I think she just assumed that I would dislike it because of that, being a man. And she also was like, it's also just not, particularly, it's not particularly, it's kind of surface level when it comes to like the fantasy of everything, and it's kind of what she described as McDonald's fantasy. This might be a term that's used by other readers, I don't really know, but she's the one that I heard first describe it that way, where it's kind of like, it's not, there's basically no nutritional value when it comes to this book in terms of like symbolism or allegory or sort of deeper themes that the book might cover. There, not that it doesn't do that, and I'll kind of dive into my thoughts about those topics in this book here in a minute, but certainly it is a book designed, it was a book written with the intention of satisfying an audience, and the audience that it's intending to satisfy, I think, is people who want a kind of fantasy setting that is a little bit spicier than your average, I guess, fantasy setting. Although, honestly, I feel like sex in fantasy books and movies is not really that rare anymore. But kind of having a little bit spicier of a fantasy novel, and people that are kind of read as a relaxation tool. People that, like, when they get off of work, they read a book so that they can kind of just like escape from, whatever it is that they're thinking about, I guess, all day. Personally, I generally tend to not read that way. I like books that are kind of challenging and books that are kind of like, books that kind of intend books that are intended to send you a message of some kind, or are meant to impart some kind of theme to the reader. Those are the kinds of books that I usually enjoy. And so I think that I think what really drew me to reading this book is that book club selected it, and I was like, I don't read a lot of fantasy, which I guess goes along with the trope of, I don't read a lot of romance, I guess I should say. Although I also kind of don't read a whole lot of fantasy either. But I guess what I'll say is that, like, I kind of wanted to challenge myself in that I like, books that are challenging. Well, sometimes books that are challenging to a reader like me are books that are not really meant for me, or books that are kind of not really the type of thing that I would normally read. So I kind of came into it with the expectations of, like, this book has a reputation as being like a ultra sexy, erotic, like fairy fuckfest, basically. Like Book Talk's perception of this book is that it's like constant fairy smut, balls to the wall, like, there's just like, it's like a porn basically, but with like fantasy plot points to kind of string the porn together. And that's really not what this book is at all. There are, I think, like 2 or 3 sex scenes, and they're really pretty tame in comparison to, if you're a reader of anything outside of like young adult fiction. I feel like, and maybe this is one of my main complaints with this book, is that like the reader base of this book feels like people that read a lot of young adult fiction and then kind of graduated to sort of adult fantasy. And so when they read things that like have a little bit of sex or like nudity or whatever, like it like it just like shuts their brain off, or they like, or in the case of many people, they're just like, oh, it's so spicy, like it's so, hot, like this is awesome, which if that's the enjoyment that you get out of it, that's awesome. Like, I mean, don't let me stop you from enjoying it. I guess just personally, I kind of was like, this is actually pretty tame, I would say, in terms of what I was expecting from the book. So, oh man, A Court of Thorns and Roses. It's the first in a trilogy, I guess or not trilogy, a series, I should say. A series that, I have been informed gets a lot better as it goes on. I've heard that this is sort of considered amongst fans of Sarah Maas, considered to be one of her weaker books. Let me take a little sip of water here. I hadn't really planned on going any further than the first book. However, upon reading it, I think that the bare minimum kind of lowest bar possible to be reached threshold of like, what point am I trying to make? Like, basically I enjoyed the book just enough to consider reading further entries in the series. That's, I guess, what I'll say. If any of you follow me on Goodreads, which I'm sure none of you do, but if you do, you would know that I'm pretty sure I rated this book 3 stars out of 5. It's like a solid 3 to me. It's not the greatest thing that I've ever read by a long shot. I think it might not even be like in my top 50 books that I've ever read. But it is good enough, I guess you could say. The book is very interestingly paced. A large majority of the beginning of the book is kind of focused on the main character, Feyre, and her being whisked away into this fantasy fairyland called the Spring Court. I think. There's all these kind of different courts in the Feyland of like different like noble houses or whatever, typical fantasy bullshit. And the spring court is where she kind of ends up and meets this gentleman by the name of Tamlin, a fey creature by the name of Tamlin, and his friend, confidant, capo guy, Lucian. And Lucian is this sort of badass dude that personally I have heard that the fandom prefers Lucian to Tamlin. I think count myself among their number. I find Tamlin to kind of be a boring character overall. Lucian seems at least a little bit more interesting and fleshed out. Feyre herself kind of feels, and I hate to kind of put it this way, but she feels like every other young adult kind of main character I've ever read. Just to give a little rundown on my history with young adult fiction, I read the first two Twilight novels. At the time that I read them, which I was like, I don't know, 17, I loved them. And I also read the first two Hunger Games books, which I liked. I didn't necessarily love. I thought they were pretty good. But again, I read those when I was a teen. And so it is sometimes very difficult to get through books like these because the operating principles of the plot are all kind of serving very specific jobs. What do I mean by that? What I mean is like it kind of feels sometimes like the writer of this book. I don't know much about Sarah Maas. I'm not here to criticize necessarily her, and I certainly don't want to presume to have a huge amount of knowledge on her writing or her writing style or anything. I'm just kind of commenting on this book here. It feels like the writer had the intention going in of like, I want a spicy fantasy story where the main character has sex with a fairy man. And in order to get to there, she has to kind of be like, okay, well, so what's up with the fairies then? They live in Fairyland. And Fairyland, which I don't remember the actual name of, the Fae live in where? They're called... what the hell is the place called? Oh, let me go to the map. Excuse me. Well, it's basically like the Prythian. And Prythian actually is where humans live as well. But the Fae control like most of Prythian. And everything beyond this wall that exists at the southern end of Prythian, everything beyond the wall is kind of controlled by fairies. I just want to quickly note, and this is kind of just exhibit exhibit 2B of why this book is kind of mid. If you take a look at this map here, you can see that Prythian in the center here is kind of a pretty close comparison to the UK, and then you've got Ireland right here called Highburn, and then you have France and Germany and like all the kind of northern Western European nations right there. It just feels like a very lazily put together map, and maybe it's one of those things where Sarah Maas, I've done this certainly when designing tabletop role-playing game campaigns and drawing maps and stuff. You kind of you use a real location as a jumping off point for you to place in your own ideas in your own kind of world. And and somewhere along the way, hopefully you change it so that it's not exactly like a. Again, I remember that like the first true D&D campaign that I ran, I basically was just using the a map of the United States to kind of illustrate where things were, so that when a character could when a player would ask, where is this place on the map, I would be like, if you were looking at a map of the United States, it would kind of be where like North Dakota is. And then the player could have kind of a mental, without me having to draw the whole map for them, they could have this kind of mental image of where the thing was. This is a huge aside for me to just basically say, I understand that sometimes you kind of need to use real world locations to create your own fantasy world. However, in a published work, a thing that you're planning on publishing and making money off of, it feels a little lazy and it feels a little dull to just be like, yeah, like, let me just let me basically just like copy the map of Northern Europe, and we'll paste in fantasy names. It just feels a little lazy, and again, it feels like something that like someone writing like their own smut OC would like kind of have as their jumping off point. Um, So I feel like I've done enough kind of shitting on the book. What do I actually like about the book? Well, there are certain points in the book where the world building kind of feels a little flavorful, a little. It feels like not just kind of your standard fantasy setting. For instance, at the sort of end of the novel, spoiler alert, by the way, we do not shy away from spoilers in this show if you've never watched it before. Um, at the towards the end of the book, we kind of get a glimpse into what lands outside of the night or of the autumn court uh, look like and feel like, and there are just kind of like giant dune worms, I guess you could say, dune sandworms that that one of which Feyre kind of does battle with. We get kind of a bigger glimpse into like what the villains in this world can do magically, like through their own fairy magic. You get little glimpses into the world beyond Feyre and her love affair with Tamlin. And those are the moments I feel like personally that kind of shine, uh, that sort of make the book feel special. I need to take a call really quick. Just give me one sec, people. Okay, we are back. My apologies. I don't remember what I was talking about. I'm sorry. I got a call from my doctor, so I was like, I can't miss this call, so I'm just gonna have to put the show on pause. Um, what do I want to talk about here? You know what? Let me go to my notes. Let me go to my notes here. See what I had written down about ACOTAR, which is, of course, what fans of the series call the Court of Thorns and Roses. So there are kind of various points in the book where I feel like I got impressions of themes of various kinds. It feels like none of them are really fleshed out or explicitly kind of exactly what one might presume. But let me read a little bit here. This is in chapter 23 on page 209. I got kind of the impression that maybe this book was having kind of a sort of environmentalism theme that it could be garnered from this book. Yeah, okay. So this is on page 209. Let me start here. The singing of birds became an orchestra, a symphony of gossip and mirth. I had never heard so many layers of music, never heard the variations and themes that wove between their arpeggios. And beyond the birdsong, there was an ethereal melody, a woman melancholy and weary, the willow. Gasping, I opened my eyes. The world had become richer, clearer. The brook was a near invisible rainbow of water that flowed over stones as invitingly smooth as silk. The trees were clothed in a faint shimmer that radiated from their centers and danced along the edges of their leaves. There was no tangy metallic stench. No, the smell of magic had become like jasmine, like lilac, like roses. I would never be able to paint it, the richness, the feel. Maybe fractions of it, but not the whole thing. Magic. Everything was magic. And it broke my heart. I kind of really love that passage because at the same time that Feyre is describing the kind of indescribable majesty and magic of nature, she's also describing her heart being broken and a melancholy voice, the voice of the willow, kind of almost representing, the voice of the earth, I guess you could say. Sort of, melancholy and weeping, this sad song that the earth is singing, despite the beauty. It's not, and this is something that kind of happens throughout the book, is that it feels like Sarah Maas is giving us little nuggets of these, what could potentially be themes of the book. But she only really gives us those nuggets, and she only gives us one or two, instead of kind of maybe drilling down on them a little bit and saying, this is what my book is trying to, this is the message that my book is trying to impart on the reader. There's only ever little glimpses of that. Another big theme that you might be able to pull from this book is one of sort of anti-racism, or it could be kind of anti-racism, it could be anti-violence. A large majority of this book is concerned with number one, sort of the human's perception of the fairies being incorrect, and a lot of the things that Feyre assumes that she knows about the Fae turns out to not be true, or some combination of those things. So it kind of becomes a thing where you're starting to get the impression that maybe Sarah Maas is trying to impart on the reader, like, don't judge a book by its cover, racism equals bad kind of thing, like. you might assume that you know something about this type of person. However, you might be incorrect, and there might be reason for you to not judge so quickly. The message of anti-violence. There are instances in the book where Tamlin is describing ways in which Fey creatures tend to mistreat humans, and Feyre kind of having to sort of, even though Tamlin is one of the more forgiving of the Fey creatures, she has to kind of paint in Tamlin's head, and thus the reader, that violence is bad and that violence should not be done to the humans of the land. So, there might be some themes that you can pull from this book. However, I think the large majority of this book is just a kind of, it is a, and I hate to be so insulting, because like there are aspects of it that I like, and I don't want to feel like I'm being unfair to this author because I don't know much about her. But it just feels like this is a book written by someone who loves young adult fiction, or loved it at one point, and is kind of continuing down that track and selling to readers who are, enjoyers of young adult fiction, which, like, in principle, I don't really have a problem with. I guess just intellectually it feels a little lazy, because young adult fiction is young adult fiction because it's meant to be read by people who haven't read a lot. And so to kind of like cater to that as your audience feels like you're intentionally kind of dumbing down your content a little bit in order to sell books, basically, is kind of the ultimate goal. It's just not for me, really. It's, and I'm not the grand crusader against, young adult readers or whatever. I think that young adult readers kind of tend to get shit on a lot when it's like, well, people just kind of like what they like, right? I don't need to be the person dying on that hill. But just personally, in my own field of view, young adult just doesn't really interest me very much. Even in the case of young adult like this, where it's like, well, she's actually 19, so she's allowed to say fuck, and she's allowed to have sex now, and she's allowed to, like, do all these adult things. It's like, well, okay, but like a 19-year-old still is kind of a boring character, because like they haven't like, I guess in the case of Feyre, she has gone through some hardship, but I think that largely when it comes to younger characters or stories that are centered around younger characters, for me, it's a little bit more difficult to get into, just because it's like, well, that person hasn't really lived that much life, so the things that they think are important usually aren't really that important. This is why, just to give you guys, do a little secret thing here. This is why I don't like a lot of anime nowadays, because anime nowadays is all about high school students. I hate to go on this little side tangent, but like, I feel like every time I'm like, hey, that anime looks kind of cool, let me check it out. Click. Oh, it's about a bunch of high schoolers falling in love. Okay, then the story has zero stakes, and what I mean, like, then literally nothing matters, like, because these are children. They're children with baby brains, and even if your children, your child with a baby brain character is 19, that doesn't instantly like make them an interesting person to follow for a story. Rant over, and I hope that the young adult readers in the audience will forgive me for my sins. I still am open to reading young adult fiction. I'm certainly open to reading more by Sarah Maas. I felt like I should probably mention that, because this is sort of the book of the moment, or at least it has been the past couple years, as people have been kind of holding this up on the pedestal as like, this is the fantasy book of the modern era. It's like, this, like, if this is our Lord of the Rings, like, this is pretty it's pretty shoddy work, I think, when compared to kind of the established fantasy canon, I guess you could say. Boom, people, that is the end of the episode. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like this video if you enjoyed it. Make sure to comment down below. Let me know what you thought of ACOTAR, A Court of Thorns and Roses. Make sure you subscribe so that you get notified when I do another episode of What You Readin' For. Follow me on Twitch, twitch.tv/Drognath. Go to Blue Sky. Check me out over there. Go to TikTok. Look up Drognath over there. You'll be able to do all of those things. Yeah, look out in the future for more of these episodes. Look out in the future for more gaming content. I might be doing some more of that as well. And on Twitch, obviously, that's where I do a lot of my gaming, but might be posting some more gaming videos over to the YouTube. I also might be starting a series soon called Played Out, which is a solo play RPG show where I'll be doing some solo actual play content in the RPG diaphragm. I don't know if that's the right word. Content space. I don't know, whatever. But yeah, keep an eye out for that. Much love, folks. Have a great Monday. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.